Hello everyone, I just wanted to give you a little introduction to what I do in Wonderdraft, and so though I have my current project in the background here, I'm going to start a new one for you all so you guys can get a good view of what I like to do in here and let my creative thoughts just kind of flow. So I'm starting a new map here. I always just like to do the biggest size possible because that's just what I like to do. But let's get started. I just do the normal assets. I don't spend money on this because I don't want to, but I'm in college, so yeah. But let's get started on this. So we just got a blank water bit here. What I kind of like to do is just let the Wonderdraft take over for a second and just generate its own continent for me. Now if I want to use the continent pattern, we will use that. And we'll make something like this. Now I can change around whatever I want with this generation, and I kind of like this, but it's not quite to what I want. I want the most detail, and I do want it kind of rough. I want it pretty rough because it's such a big map, and it's going to be, continent-wide. And the water level, I think I'll just keep it there because I don't want to mess with that too much. And I can actually change that in the water here, so I don't have to worry about that. Alright, now I kind of like this, and I can edit some stuff on here to make it even better to what I want it to be. So yeah, let's get started. And the first thing we will do is look at the water. And this is just the main menu stuff, but so the first thing I kind of want to do is I like this bay right here. So all I'm gonna do is paint a bit of water. I'm gonna have the roughness a little further up to make it a little more natural. But we're just gonna go like that. That's about right. And then what we can do is go to land here. And see how this rough spot is kind of looking weird. It's not looking right like the rest of it. We can just kind of go back through. This is kind of like a primer for the rest of the land. If anything. Okay. There we go. That's what I want. Okay, so let's go through. Erase this first. We don't want it looking that smooth. So actually, I think what I'll just do is do the raise elevation terrain and use that to kind of roughen up the borders of this here so it doesn't look too unnatural. We accidentally mixed the water and the land right there, so we will go through like that. Okay, cool. And yeah, I like the way the rest of that is placed, so we will just kind of keep how these look. I might add another larger lake here, but we will get to that later. Let's look at the rest of this though. So I'm noticing I've got a lot of empty water space out here and along the edges that I can use for something to be a little more creative with. So all I'm going to do is just make some land over here, make it pretty interesting as best I can. And this is what a lot of the process is, and it's just kind of like making anything creative that you want. Like I just made a sea right here out of all this, and I think it looks decent. You may not, but you're entitled to that opinion. But I literally just did that out of just kind of clicking on the screen, of course, and you can just keep going like this. Now, because this is not entirely realistic, I'm going to add some smaller islands along here so that as we are making this map, we're not dealing with just the big islands that, make it look like we're looking at an archipelago, but we're actually looking at a continent. We're not looking at Japan, we're looking at probably North America. It's probably the scale of this. But yeah, I'm just going to add a lot of these little islands here. And something I learned is like if you do, for example, if you're going to make islands that look like this along the coast of something, that is because of ice shelves that receded and dropped deposits of dirt and mud and all that kind of stuff as they were receding. And you see this in a lot of places in North America, like Boston, or not Boston, Massachusetts. The entirety of Cape Cod and Long Island and a lot of other places down there are like this because of the ice shelves that used to reside there. And this is, of course, I'm putting this on the northern half of the continent because of that fact. This island is a little less explainable in that case, but I'll just do this to make up for it. But yeah, and again, this is an artistic project. This is not any sort of realism painting or whatever you want it to be. But this is not meant to be insanely realistic and whatnot. But it's just meant to be fun, meant to let some of your creative juices flow. But yeah, I'm just gonna keep going on these islands for a bit. You know what's great for a lot of these kind of bay areas is a little bit of islands in there and a little bit of deposits in there. And if you're thinking about making a map that has a lot to do with the modern world, you could even make artificial islands. I'm not going to do that because the way I'm envisioning this is it's more medieval. But if you're dealing with the modern setting, you could actually add an artificial island that's like, you know, triangle shaped, like that, if you wanted. Again, no judgments. You could use that for like a military outpost, or if just some rich guy wanted to put something down. Like in, what is that, Abu Dhabi, I think? But anyways. This kind of looks like Switzerland to me. I don't know if you guys get that, but it looks like Switzerland. Alright. So I'm pretty happy with how the rest of this looks. I think what I will do real quick is roughen up. I'll roughen up these little bits so that they're not as circular. Now, to be fair, if you're zoomed out of this map, you will probably not see a lot of these details. But because I am bored and don't feel like doing what I need to do, and I feel like doing this instead, I will waste time and roughen up these islands. The bad side about doing this is that sometimes you'll get just islands that look like half moons or crescents, but that's okay. It's all about getting your artistic side out. Now, you're autistic, that's different. Save that for later, but this is just for your artistic side. Alright, now that I've gotten some of these details in, I would like to lay out some of the natural terrain, and Wonderdraft is fantastic about this, that they allow you to do this. And these are just the preset symbols you can use for mountains and hills and trees and cities and whatever. And I like the default ones. If you want, you can buy more online. I forget the website's name, but you can get more online if you want. So whenever you're doing bays and things like this, a lot of the reasons that it happens is because you get these natural areas where water can't really escape out of, and that's why like the water doesn't go into this. And the reason why this isthmus would be here is because there are at least mountainous, or not at least mountainous, at least some sort of terrain that would hinder it from going any further. So if you're looking at like where Corinth is in Greece, you'll notice that it's pretty hilly over there, and that's kind of why that land is able to be there even when the water's higher up, is because the water just can't get through. And so whenever you're dealing with bays like this, you'll see a lot more rugged and rough terrain along the edges of it. And terraining, what I like to do with terraining is I like to just take it section by section, because, I did choose the biggest scale of a map you can have, and so you take it section by section. You don't try to tackle it all at once. You really just try to get as much as you can, I should say, as much detail as you can into a certain section as much as you can. Because if you try to terrain the entire continent all at once, it's going to be a bit of a disaster and a nightmare to do. I have done that before, and it's possible, but you just kind of get tired of doing the same thing over and over again. So as we're going through this, I am going to be switching from terraining to doing the regions to doing the pathing and all that kind of stuff, because doing this all at once is a little bit tiring. And kind of on that same note, when you're dealing with lakes, not necessarily bays, but lakes, you kind of run into the same thing where you have to, not have to per se, it's your world, but you tend to come across very mountainous terrain, and that's because all a lake really is, it's just water trapped into a certain space. It can't get anywhere except, of course, into the lake. And that's why, when you're traveling across the Rocky Mountains or in Canada or even in Alaska, you don't see as many water bodies going into the oceans. Especially if you're like inland America, you see a lot of lakes. I think Canada is the number two beside Finland. But those two have a lot of lakes in their countries because of their rugged terrain like this, because all of it traps that water in. The rugged terrain doesn't let the water really get out. Okay, well, I think that will do for the terraining over here. So the next thing I want to do in kind of like this layer of symboling is the trees next. Now I have a lot of trees I can go by, but I don't necessarily like all of them, especially with the style I'm using. This white on the paper style, I don't like it so much. I like to go with these kinds of trees and these kinds of trees, and then for deserts I'll use this palm tree, and sometimes I will use these kind of shrubs and brushes to kind of symbolize like a little hotter places. So I'm thinking I'll do the kind of like hotter places in this area and probably around the bay, get it a little bit of a Mediterranean feel. So kind of like this. Maybe even have it up here a little bit so you get a little more variety with it. But when you're dealing with when I'm gonna be up here, I'm definitely gonna be dealing with more of the pine trees rather than these aspen or oak trees. So yeah, let's get started on that. So something that you can think about doing, and I don't do this terribly often, but is varying the size of your trees to give it a little more variety. Maybe a little bit of age of the forest, because bigger trees are usually older. Now something you really want to keep in mind is that you don't necessarily want to just fill up your entire map with this landscaping and this terraining, because a lot of this is going to have, I mean, depending on the map you want to do, but a lot of times when I'm doing this, I'm really trying to draw out nations and political environments, and so I try to avoid making everything this kind of terrain feel. But whenever you're doing this, you want to keep that in mind, is that not everything is about the environment. It can be if you want, but if you're going to include things like countries and nations and cities on your map, you want to keep in mind that you do need to leave space for them so they can actually have some space on your map. Actually, I want to get rid of some of these because that was a little too dense. These guys are a little hard to pick out sometimes. And I think for this video, I'll just focus on this area that I've terrained right here. I don't want this to go on for too long. But yeah, I think I'll just be focusing on this area. And I think for this area that I'm going to work on, I think that's good for the trees. Just keeping in balance where I want to put all these kinds of nations and everything else. But I think next we will work on the rivers. And normally a lot of people actually like to do rivers before the trees. But I don't think it matters too much, because I think what you'll end up with is a pretty similar result. Because the thing with rivers is that they're guided more by the rugged terrain of the mountains and the hills than forests and anything like that. Now when you're dealing with this, what you'll see, like right here, and I'm adjusting my width right now, I want this a pretty medium-ish width of a river, because this is going to be going into the lake right here, because there are not a lot of places for that water to go other than to that lake. And I'm also going to have a lot of smaller rivers going into it. Maybe I'll even have one up here. Here. Alright. And these hills actually give a pretty good spot to start a river from. Because, you know, rain falls in the hilly terrain and the water has to go somewhere, and it goes downhill all the time. So you'll get things like this where the rivers start out from the high ground and go into the low ground. And so when you're looking at something like this, you'll actually see it's a lot of rainfall. And so you'll find out it's a lot of marshy terrain because there's just so much water in here. If 3 rivers are going into a bay, and they're pretty sizable rivers too. But since I want this place to be a little drier, I'm going to have the rivers be a little thinner. I still want this one to go in here, but I can even have another one that goes out here. And again, whenever you're dealing with rivers, you want to keep in mind where the terrain is, because it always has to go from high to low. So if I can use this as an example here, the river will come up to the hills, but it won't necessarily go through them, because that wouldn't make sense with how water travels. Something else that you want to keep in mind is that you'll never, ever, 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 ever want a river to split. You will always see a lot of rivers joining together, but you will almost never in nature see a river splitting into 2 directions. So that would be like if I had a river going from here, and then I ended it right here, and then I started another river. That never happens. That does not happen ever. Ever, ever, ever in nature. So keep away from doing that. But you will always see our rivers joining together like that. But you'll never see them splitting in 2. Alright, I really like how this looks, and so we will move on. We will actually come back next time for the regions and countries and etc. But that will be it for today. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a good rest of your day.